Arlen Rourke heard the supercarrier before he ever saw her. The sovereign Halcyon sang down the length of Caligo Station's hull like a struck bronze bell, mag-drive turbines warbling, mountain-size plating creaking as it cycled between atmospheres. Most cadets boarding for the first semester of the Pan-Galactic War College stood in awe under that thunder. Arlen felt only the sweat pooling under the thin latex of the biosculpt he wore across his bone. To the retinal scanners and voice archivists, he was Cadet Tavorzin of the Z-Ver Dominion, a pale, long-limbed mammal with a fluttering second heart and a faint ultraviolet glow under the skin. In truth, he was the last volunteer of the Terran Displacement Front, and he had risked 22 light-years in cryo to get here. The Terrans had been exiled from the hierarchy's inner provinces, their population capped, their fleet gutted. The War College was where the hierarchy minted the admirals who enforced that exile. A single student could never bring down the edifice, but a student who controlled the college's own simulation core might open a fault line wide enough for the truth. Arlen shuffled forward with the intake queue while the brass-scaled Cytharian drillmaster barked ident scans. The cadets ahead stiffened under bursts of solar-hot scrutiny, but the false biometrics embedded in Arlen's bones registered flawlessly. When the drillmaster's ocular frills settled and the pathway lights turned green, he exhaled through his nose, allowing the air to vibrate within the tiny vox chips hidden in his sinuses. They modulated the exhale, secreting packets of code that hitchhiked on the Halcyon's environmental telemetry. 3 decks below the receiving bay, the carrier's combat simulation lattice accepted his handshake. That invisible foothold was the first brick laid in a wholly different battlefield. The sovereign Halcyon housed an entire city of warcraft embedded within its hull. Fighter berths, mineship cradles, a moonlit canyon where dreadnought cores hung like stalactites. Yet the most guarded precinct was the Simulus, a kilometer of cryo-cooled photonic glass, where the War College ran its legendary combat programs. Every admiral in 3 quadrants trusted those algorithms more than they trusted their own bloodlines. If Arlen could rewrite them subtly, irrevocably, he could expose the Achilles heel Terran intelligence had spent decades mapping in captured black boxes. He attended classes by day, earning the middling scores expected of a Sever exchange student. By night, he returned to a coffin-sized berth, whose sensors he had looped with a heartbeat emulator. There, tucked behind a folded hammock, rested a polymer satchel no thicker than a fingernail. Inside swam 1,000,000 ferroglass mites, the code carvers each one, etched with a sliver of devil's tongue, humanity's forbidden encryption language. On the 6th night, while the supercarrier coasted through Gliese 421's auroras, Arlen released the mites into the air duct. They obeyed the quantum watermark emanating from his vox chips, fanning out through maintenance shafts toward the Simulus. No firewall fought to screen for insects. The War College believed its enemies would come wrapped in torpedoes, not dust. He waited, listening to the blood roar of recycled air, until, one by one, the mites pinged confirmation. They had reached the core's mercury pools where light and probability danced. Days melted into orbital cycles. The curriculum hurled the cadets through boarding scenarios, debris field math, treatises on stellar wind sabotage. Arlen's squad leader, a serrated spine Malarian named Korash, bragged that he could depressurize a refugee barge in under 90 seconds. The other cadets laughed, mandibles clacking like castanets. Arlen laughed too, playing the gentle Xaver scholar, while beneath the table his thumb brushed the pad of skin where the Terran resistance had inked his real name. The code carvers reported steady progress. The Simulus no longer obeyed its old shortcuts, the pathological assumptions that let hierarchy commanders punch above their numerical weight. Arlen had inserted truer physics, the messy kind, drift lag, quantum noise, imperfect shield harmonics. The tweaks were imperceptible in small drills, but during a fleet-scale exercise, the deltas would compound into cascading error. In 4 days, the entire sophomore cohort would participate in the Orion Bulwark war game. A live-fire drill near the college's proving moons. Admiral Veth Ralslek herself would observe. The scenario pitted the cadets' mixed-species task force against an AI-controlled insurgent fleet modeled loosely on historical Terran tactics. The admiral liked to call it nostalgia hunting. The War College had staged and won the Orion Bulwark every year for a century. This year, Arlen intended them to lose, catastrophically. The cadets launched at 0300, their nerves replaced by injector lines of caffeine gel and protocol. Arlen rode shotgun in the frigate Lancet of Dawn, disguised in his Zephyr-Vac rig, eyes hidden behind compound lenses. Karash swaggered on the command dais, shouting angle corrections. Outside the portholes, Halcyon herself hung in regal silhouette, 12 kilometers of gunmetal ribs and hangar canyons, while 3 small moons glimmered like tethered pearls. "Simulus handover in 10, announced the frigate's VI. "Live weapons are green-tagged but inhibited. Admiral on high band." Static crackled, then the gravel timbre of Veth Ralslek filled the cabin. "Remember your oaths, cadets. Victory is found in iteration. You will rewrite your enemy's code until only surrender remains." The Commodore 2B's voice sounded ritualized, as though she recited scripture rather than strategy. Arlen's fingers danced on his console, firing off an unremarkable telemetry pull behind which rode the final patch. The code carvers in the Simulus caught it, flipped a switch, and let the new physics rule. The clock ticked 0. All across the exercise grid, starfighters kicked to life, main batteries spit test plasma, and frigates arranged into textbook pincer arcs. The insurgent simulants emerged from behind the smallest moon in dagger formations of scarlet light. It seemed, for the first 90 seconds, like every previous Orion bulwark. Then, drift lag bit. A Malarian cruiser overshot its intercept window by 2 full seconds. Its plasma torpedoes, modeled now with realistic magnetic bloom, spiraled off course and detonated among its own escort skiffs. Shields that the old algorithm would have deemed unwavering began to flicker under stochastic particle seep. Missile locks broke. IR signatures mismatched. Koresh cursed, stabbing commands. "Lancet, starboard 30. Engines, compensate for vector shear." But the vector shear was real. The compensator math baked into the nav software had always relied on a quiet fudge factor, and Arlen had deleted it. Across the fleet, entire formations skidded out of sync. Cadets, who'd internalized doctrine from sanitized sims, suddenly found the enemy inside their laps. Panic pulsed through voice loops. Admiral Veth's voice slammed back on comms. "Full stop all craft! Suspend simulation!" The glow of the insurgent AI froze, yet the cadets' ships did not. Gyros yawed. Thrusters sputtered. A frigate's rail cannon, loaded with tungsten for authentic mass feedback, loosed a salvo that should have flagged inert. The shells weren't supposed to arm. They armed anyway. A splatter of hyper-accelerated metal shredded the port weapons pod of the cruiser's sun vigil. Hull shards blossomed into a glittering storm. A ripple of shouting cascaded over every channel. Arlen's chest went hollow. The Simulus purge routine he'd built should have corralled lethal outcomes within safe bounds. Either he'd miscalculated, or the Admiral had triggered a higher security cage that collided with his code and stripped safeties. The exercise had become live combat, but inside that yawning terror he recognized an opening. If real blood was now on the line, the hierarchy would fall back on doctrine. Doctrine that under his revised physics would fail harder the more desperately it was applied. Arlen muted his mic and whispered, "Passenger." He overridden the Lancet of Dawn's passenger lock and slid into the auxiliary tack station. A quick splice fed him the frigate's weapon grid. He rerouted firing authority to his console behind a veneer of maintenance override. Korash didn't notice. The Malarian was too busy cursing the faltering inertial sinks. Arlen transmitted on an encrypted microburst to the code carver's network. New directives flowed. Isolate high-band Admiralty control. Spoof internal network topography. Blind the bridge of the Sovereign Halcyon for a maximum of 3 minutes. 10 seconds later, the supercarrier's holoflash status went dark across every ship. The War College's beating heart had been plunged into informational vacuum. Within the Halcyon's command spire, Admiral Veth throttled her personal comlink. She had lost sensor telemetry from 60 vessels, her AR visor filled with 404 ghosts, and her bridge crew were shouting contradictory damage reports. The security partitions of the Simulus had been carved out from the inside. She could see that now, replaced with code in a flavor she didn't recognize. A sharp flexing grammar that almost tasted Terran. Impossible. Terra was a leashed planet of farmers and poets. Her exo floated to her station. "Ma'am, cruiser Sun Vigil confirms casualties. Rail rounds penetrated aft decks. We've lost 2 cadets." Murmurs rippled across the pit. War games had claimed lives before catastrophic resonance, oxygen fires, but never on the Admiral's watch. She steadied her breathing, felt the star of her rank pin scorch against her uniform. "Restore my uplink," she hissed. "Then find me the saboteur." Arlen's second heart borrowed from Virgin's hammered double time. He locked the frigate's missile racks onto the unmanned hull of Proctor Station, a monitoring platform. Cutting apart the station would scatter debris into the college fleet's central corridor, forcing a retreat to the carrier for cover. The Institute's entire cadet wing would cluster near Halcyon's hangars, just where Arlen needed them. He fired. Ion-shrouded rods ripped the station into tumbling orbs of slag. Klaxons howled across the exercise grid. Hierarchy doctrine mandated consolidation under a command umbrella in crisis, and sure enough, squadron leaders began recall vectors toward the carrier like iron shavings toward a magnet. Korash finally noticed his console was locked out. He swung toward Arlen, dorsal spines erect. "What treachery is this?" Arlen retracted the Tzuzi accent, letting the muted consonants of Terran bass glide from his throat. "Statistical justice." He flicked a wrist blade from his vac rig and jabbed the junction coupling that fed oxygen to Korash's suit. A hiss. The Molarian gagged, claws scrabbling, before he collapsed into safe mode paralysis. Arlen keyed the bulkhead and dragged the limp form into the emergency locker. The bridge crew had 1 minute of sensor blackout left. He triggered the lifeboat seal on the spectator deck, an act that, according to the rulebook, would summon emergency docking approval from the carrier's AI. The Lancet of Dawn lurched onto a retrieval trajectory. The cruiser's own cadets would read the lifeboat call as a plea, not knowing it carried their saboteur. "We're coming home," Arlen whispered. Port looked darkly inside. Halcyon yawned like a cathedral. Arlen slipped through a maintenance port before security drones finished their handshake. The bay was chaos. Fighters crash parking, crew chiefs screaming, sparks raining from severed plasma couplings. When 2 armored provosts jogged past, he mirrored their stride, barking nonsense in Zever vowels. No one questioned an officer running toward a fire. Level G57 housed the Simulus primary node. Living there, beneath a forest of photonic chill columns, hummed the quantum matryoshka Arlen had rewritten. He sprinted down graded stairs, using the internal map he'd memorized months before. Every corridor trembled under distant shockwaves as the panicked fleet fouled its own maneuvers. A biometric arch stood between him and the node. His disguise wouldn't pass that threshold. The arch sniffed mitochondrial ancestry. He knelt, peeled the vox chips from his nostrils, and crushed them. Their last act of life was to broadcast a fractal key the code carvers had waited for. Circuits inside the arch overloaded, rendering bone white. He stepped through a plume of smoke. Inside the node chamber, a holowarp projected the entire carrier, lit with urgent red fracture shield. Nodes down, power buses overloading. The Simulus had begun bleeding its altered constants into Halcyon's battle management logic, forcing the real ship to obey the messier universe. Engines stuttered under torque they hadn't been built to endure. Arlen placed a palm on the control plinth. "Run Exodus protocol," he said. The command was human code buried in the mites from day one. A circular progress bar winked, broadcasting, read, only data to all BattleNet channels. Every ship in a 20 light-second radius would now receive the raw diagnostic of hierarchy shield physics, complete with equations Terran rebels could exploit to pierce them. It was the blueprint of vulnerability, gift-wrapped for every suppressed world. The broadcast needed 5 minutes. Security doors slammed behind him. Admiral Veth Ralsek strode through the smoke, flanked by 4 provosts in storm armor, her eyes, golden as nova glass, fixed on the cadet whose skin flickered between Zevra luminescence and Terran pallor as the biosculpt failed under heat. She raised a particle sidearm. Power down whatever you unleashed. Arlen lifted his hands, stepped sideways to mask the hollow projection's progress bar from her line of sight. You built your empire on a physics model that flatters you, Admiral. I simply took away the flattery. A dead model can be replaced. Dead cadets cannot. Grief cracked her voice. Maybe she'd known the students lost aboard Sun Vigil. Surrender and you will stand trial. Terra might even get a lighter leash. Terra would rather die on its feet. He flicked a wrist. An arc baton telescoped from his sleeve. The Admiral fired. The bolt skimmed his shoulder plate, molten plasma searing flesh. He didn't feel it. Adrenaline and focus, a trick he'd learned in Terran insurgency drills so brutal they'd make Korash's jokes sound like lullabies. Arlen lunged. The baton met the Admiral's sidearm, discharging a sonic ripple that shattered a provost's visor. Another provost slammed a kinetic shield into Arlen's ribs. Something cracked. He pivoted, rolled under a second bolt, jammed his baton through the shield's energy lattice and vented its field. Spark arcs danced across armor. 40 seconds. The Admiral ducked low, swept Arlen's legs, but he used the momentum to roll onto the plinth. He typed one-handed while blocking strikes with the baton, coppery blood spattering the hollow orb. The broadcast ticked above 90%. Admiral Veth roared, ripped a fallen provost's shield emitter, and hurled it. The plate struck Arlen's forearm, snapping bone. The baton clattered. She closed the gap, sidearm leveled between his eyes. Your life for the off-net, she said. Arlen smiled despite the pain. Too late. Progress hit 100%. A chime sang, the kind of gentle tone lit classrooms used to mark recess. Data replication locked. System caches wrote themselves immutable. The flaw was out, irretrievable, living on every navigator's drive in the quadrant. Beth fired, but the bolt glanced, sizzling past his ear because one of her own provost had jostled her aim. The soldier's visor depolarized, revealing a purple-skinned, Neurathi cadet eyes wide with horror at the Admiral's intent to execute a classmate. Morale fracture, Arlen thought hazily. Real combat breeds real doubts. He dove sideways as the 2 loyal provosts wrestled with the uncertain third. The Admiral cursed, tried for a clean shot, but in those breaths, Arlen slammed a fist onto the plinth's emergency purge. Coolant flooded the node, shorting photonic arrays. The room shook. Somewhere far above, the Halcyon's lights dimmed. He ran. Sirens wailed. Bulkheads sealed behind him, forced by the carrier's damaged AIs into segmented lockdown. Arlen slipped through a vent shaft just before the hatch cut the corridor, leaving the Admiral and her provosts trapped with a dying simula. 2 decks higher, in an auxiliary hangar, cadets clustered amid crisscrossing alarms. Some helped bloodied classmates from scorched fighters. Others argued about chain of command. No senior officer could route orders through the mangled net. Into that vacuum, Arlen climbed atop a maintenance crawler and opened his suit's vox. His amplified voice rolled across the hangar. Hierarchy doctrine is failing because it was written to lie. Look at your sensor logs. Those weren't insurgent tricks, they were physics. You were never taught to respect. The supercarrier's shields are faltering because they're calibrated to a fantasy. Faces lifted, dozens of species, eyes of jade, gold, obsidian. Some scowled, some looked terrified. All were listening. Arlen continued. The data is free now. In every nav computer, you are no longer cadets, you are witnesses. Choose whom you'll serve, the truth or the comfort of an empire built on selective equations. Above them, the Halcyon groaned, a leviathan confused by its own muscles. Fires dotted the dorsal ridge. Escape pods began lancing into vacuum, piloted by officers unwilling to test lies against reality. A cadet, a reptilian Vic, shouted, "If the shields can be fixed, do it! We're still aboard!" Arlen nodded. "We can stabilize her, but not under the Admiral. She would rather scuttle the Halcyon than admit fallibility." Murmurs turned into consensus. Weapons were lowered, suits keyed to public channels. A coalition of cadets sealed the hangar doors, declared autonomy, and set to work triaging the carrier. For the first time since the Halcyon left dry dock, her fate lay in hands, unranked by hierarchy scrolls. Admiral Veth made one final gambit. From the compromised simulus, she triggered a scuttle failsafe, a slow-burn overload of the singularity core that powered the ship. She then commandeered a patrol skiff, intent on escape before detonation. But the new physics bit her too. The skiff's drive, misaligned by less than a milliradian enough, under real equations, to sputter and stall inside the carrier's shield envelope. Cadet engineers, following Arlen's broadcast blueprints, used a tractor web to reel the skiff back and lock it to the hull. They marched the Admiral, seething, into custody. With combined effort and newfound skepticism, the cadets rewrote the overload routine, cooling the core. It took 12 hours, 3 impromptu surgeries and every drop of coolant, but the Halcyon survived. By then, the broadcast had rippled across hierarchy space. Friend girl militias confirmed the flaw with field tests, punching holes in local garrisons' shields. Negotiation channels erupted. Some sectors declared neutrality, others mutinied. The pan-galactic hierarchy had been wounded in the spot it believed invincible. When the Terran extraction vessel Stargazer slid from dark space 6 days later, it found the supercarrier under student control, her gun batteries silent but aimed outward in warning. A delegation of mixed-species cadets hailed the Terrans and offered diplomatic parley. Among them was Arlen Rourke, arm in a regrowth sling, biosculpt half-shed, eyes bright with exhaustion and something fiercer. Possibility. Stargazer's captain, an old insurgent who'd once served sentences in hierarchy ice mines, saluted. "You realize you just drafted the galaxy's most overqualified freshman class into open rebellion?" Arlen smiled. "I prefer to call it continuing education." The cadets traded glance for glance across species lines, predators beside herbivores, silicon beside carbon bound by shared disillusion. Stars wheeled overhead, brilliant and indifferent. Somewhere in that sprawl, fleets were already recalibrating their shields, rewriting their textbooks, redrawing their maps. History, like physics, had become honest, and honesty, Arlen thought as the airlock sealed behind him, was the most dangerous weapon humans had ever smuggled into enemy territory.